He hosted Fox and Friends. He hosted the Brian Kilmeade Show. He filmed One Nation with Brian Kilmeade that will air tomorrow night. I do want to remind everyone, we purchased Brian's brand new book for every person in this room. Brian assigned a book plate for every person in this room. That's for your book when it comes in. The book will be out on November 7th. He didn't ask me to do this, but I want to do it. BrianKilmeade.com is an awesome thing. You should bookmark it, put it on the smart screen or the home screen of your smartphones, because for gifts and things, Brian, you can tell from meeting Brian. I heard him say 300 times, "Hi, I'm Brian." Everybody knows he's Brian, but he's so modest that he just doesn't, think that he's special. He doesn't think that he's a big deal, but he is a big deal. He and Allison and their family went through a lot to get here today, and I'm very grateful, because it would have been a heck of a night to say Brian meant to be here and he didn't do that to us. It would have been an easy phone call to make. It's a state of emergency. Can't get in, can't get out. Our limo told us they couldn't get in. How did he get here? So God is great. And I'm thankful for his friendship. I'm thankful each and every time he gets called through Allison to say, "Harry, can you fill in?" You think about this, when someone trusts you with their show. Brian Kilmeade has worked so hard on the Brian Kilmeade Show. There's a reason, and Ed, if you do the honors of putting it up on the screen, don't worry about the little guy behind him, number 29. Brian Kilmeade is number 3 in the country. And to be honest with you, and I love Michael Harrison, he's my dear friend, and we don't have split decisions. Brian really is at least number 2. But he's number 3. So I call that Mount Rushmore. Only room for 4. He keeps moving up. If you were here 5.5 years ago when Brian spoke, it could not have been more humble. When I say BrianKilmeade.com, I'm saying it's great for gifts. He'll personalize everything. He makes it very, very special. It's wonderful to do that for family members and people that that love Brian's work. No one's doing what Brian Kilmeade does right now. Brian Kilmeade is the great historian of our time. He is connecting the dots. He's telling the stories. Because remember, if we modify history and we start vaporizing people and all these things that are going on right now, what do our children and our grandchildren, future generations, what do they inherit? What truth will they know? Could you imagine? It's almost like a Twilight Zone episode. Are we 3 generations from people thinking George Washington was a terrible man? Brian writes about all of this, and each one, he's a great author to become very friendly with, because each one connects to the one before it. He's a great, great storyteller, but he's a truth teller. So without further ado, if you would join me, Brian, and take this microphone. Everybody's been waiting. This is the moment of the program. And then right after Brian's done, we'll do a quick Q&A on the mic, and then you can ask a few questions as well. Keep in mind, I think Brian is in hour number 21 of his day. Brian Kilmeade, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. First off, a round of applause for Senator Hurley. That was an unbelievable speech. And thank you for reading Thomas Jefferson, the Tripoli Pirates, and Harry Hurley. It's my privilege to be here. It's so great to know if I have to take a day off, you're there. And when the whole country gets a chance to hear you, we got about 200 stations. They love Harry around the country, so watch out. He could be leaving you in Atlantic City. I don't think so, but it could happen. You never know. But this is an incredible event you put together. The dedication everybody in this room has to you and your cause, and to live in your hometown and thrive in your hometown, I can relate to, because I still live in Massapequa, where I grew up. And now we're not very proud to have a serial killer just down the block. Not great. And Alec Baldwin. So it's not a safe neighborhood. But Harry, it's great to see you. And Senator, it's great to follow you. Also, Frank Morano's here. Frank, the only guy who gets to stand up, Frank, for WABC. He does an unbelievable job at night, #1 in the country. And I harass him every Thursday at about 4:30 in the morning. He calls me, he's like, "You sure you're up?" I'm like, "Of course I'm up. This is my time. This is my 12 noon. So, and also, the reason I'm here today is Allison. So we get a call that the New Jersey side of the tunnel cannot get in. He says, we'll meet you we have to get a ride out. I'll drive you the rest of the way if you get a ride out. So Allison Mansfield finds a way to get a car to get us out of the tunnel to meet the New Jersey car at the rest stop, where we were able to hook up with them and go the rest of the way. So Allison, great job, continues to be a great producer in life and in radio. Just a quick note, if you do get out of the tunnel and you pull up to a rest stop and you say, let's try a Starbucks, unless you have 45 minutes to get a latte, don't go inside. All right, that was my public service announcement. So I don't know if you saw 2 weeks ago, I thought we might be through this, but the New York City Council is voting on whether to take George Washington statues down from New York City. Oh, really? You were gonna sit there as a city council member and say, you know, George Washington is not up to my standards. Let's think about this for a second. If George Washington's not up to your standards, you're in the wrong country. We're in the middle of a war on history. And it used to be China. When we grew up, oh, Soviet Union doesn't like America. When we travel around the countries, people are jealous of America. Now in America, we're raising a generation that doesn't like America. So instead of just saying, I know you're wrong, I thought if I could just do my little part and arm audiences that are kind enough to come out, like you guys, and if I get invited to a great event like this one, little by little, I'd like to arm you at your next tailgate, next family get together, next time you're hanging out at the water cooler, and you hear people say, America is not an exceptional nation, and that we should apologize for our past. I will say we're not perfect, but I think what's great about America is we try to be. And people mistaken the fact that we argue and we disagree on stuff. They think we're coming apart. That's just what we do. But we come together at the right time and always have. I do not think the country's coming apart. I do not think we're at a tipping point. I think we're at a challenge, but we always get the right person at the right time. So instead of believing me and thinking, how is Brian a soothsayer, why don't we look back? So I write this book, George Washington's Secret Six, because over 20 years, we always thought George Washington won the Revolutionary War, and he had some great generals. But I realized it was so-called average, everyday people doing extraordinary things who lived and died without fame and acclaim, but in their time were appreciated by the people that knew them best. So you know Washington. But did you know that a farmer got together with a grocery store owner? They got together with a journalist, a printer back then. They did both. They got together with a guy who owned a bar and a longshoreman, and over the course of 4 years, put together their own spy chart and graphics in order to spy behind enemy lines in New York and Long Island and New Jersey to beat the #1 superpower in the world. People think it happened at Yorktown. Yes. But the only reason it happened at Yorktown, and New York would actually be turned it back into our town, is because these spies went behind enemy lines and went from a Long Island Sound to Long Island to Manhattan, round and round for 4.5 years, knowing that if you spy, you die. How do I know that? Because the first spy was Nathan Hale. He was caught in 3 days. He had a great heart, great courage, but had no idea how to spy. He lands on Long Island, lands in Huntington, and one day he speaks up. They realize this is a British officer, and this guy's basically walking into a bar saying, anybody here know the British? I need to know their secrets. He gets nailed, brought to Manhattan. On 63rd and 3rd, he gets hung. The message is, you spy, you die, don't try it, you will lose. And I only have one life to give for my country. That's courage. And that was said. In that audience was Major Talmadge, and he watched his friend from college get hung. The school teacher who missed the Battle of Bunker Hill, but just wanted to give to a cause, not even a country. Major Talmadge would be ready when George Washington needed a spy master. He goes, I know the guys. I know the guys that know Long Island. I know the guys that know Manhattan. They'll have a cover story. They made up, everybody had numbers. George Washington was 7-Eleven because he was always open. That's my idea. but he was 7-Eleven. You had 55, who was the lady working behind enemy lines. They think that she was working, taking care of our prisoners, but at the same time, penetrated the social circles. And when it was all said and done, and Benedict Arnold was about to give up West Point, and maybe Washington with it, they were able to find out that plot before it happened. They were able to find out the British naval codes and get it to the French before the Battle of Yorktown. They were able to work behind enemy lines and find out that the British were going to flood our country with counterfeit currency and make the soldiers feel they were working for nothing and dispirit them on the spot. They unearthed that. They stopped that. And they lived and died in total secrecy until 1920. I thought that's the American story. We do things because we want to do it, because we love the country. We don't do it for a pat in the back, because we bleed red, white, and blue. Right person at the right time, George Washington. You look into his background, the guy didn't go past, he didn't go to school past 11 years old. He wanted to go train like his brothers with the British and learn to be an officer, but he had to stay home because his dad died and his mom didn't remarry. So he had to work on the farm, and he stayed in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And where they crossed were people coming to America for the first time, and he would hear their stories and watch them disappear into the woods and know they would settle. He understood the American spirit. He hung out with older guys. He learned about leadership. And then when it was time to go to war, Major Washington went to the 7 Years' War. He came out a colonel, but he learned how to fight with the British and their maneuvers, against the French, so they'd be great allies, and he learned from the American Indians how to do guerrilla warfare. Without guerrilla warfare, we don't win the war. The right man at the right time in the right country, or we don't win. George Washington didn't happen by accident. There's a reason why he's on a statue. We cannot judge people by their times, our times. We got to judge them by the times in which they lived. Believe me, Barack Obama in 2008 gets elected because he says marriage is between a man and a woman. In 2012, if he said that, he doesn't get the nomination. Was he a terrible person in 2008, and was he a genius in 2012? Nothing is the truth of what I just said. That's the reality of what we live. Judge people on their times. Learn from it. Wow, we learn differently now. That's great. But if you want to know the personification of leadership, you want to know how special this country is, keep in mind Washington learned in the middle of a war. We learn every day. Here he is squaring off at Bunker Hill, having some success, gets back to New York, and he wants to square off with the British. But the British bring in their armada. We're unprepared, we're outmanned, and they almost wipe us out. But out of nowhere, backed up to the Hudson River, backed up is our army, and we think we're going to get wiped out. But when the sun goes down, Washington says, I can't fight, I gotta go. So one by one, boats, civilian boats and canoes show up, and they ferry Washington's troops into Manhattan. And when the sun comes up, only half his army is out. And in comes a mysterious fog to keep them without suspicion. They think the Washington guys, our army's still there. But it blocks everything out. And with that fog, not only do we get out, Washington even gets his horses out. He's the last to leave. In case you think that's a myth, you get Major Talmadge's notes. They finally said, Dad, Ben Talmadge, said, you got to write down. You've had an unbelievable life. Write this story down. And he talked about being by Washington's side and the fog being so thick, if I put my hand out, I couldn't see my fingers. That's the right country at the right time. We were supposed to exist. We had the right leadership at the right time. And sooner or later, gradually, we wore them out and we beat the world's #1 superpower. That's your country. It's not an exceptional nation, maybe, definitely. But there's this country called Britain, and they want a rematch. And it's called the War of 1812. Only this time we got you without the French. Now Madison says, we got to fight. They're taking our guys. And our ships go out. They upset our trade routes. They strip our boats. They take our crew. They have no respect for us. They're harassing us. We have to stand up and fight. The whole world's watching. Okay? So Madison says, let's fight. So he takes his army, sends them right up to Canada, where he thinks the British are. But the British have the whole East Coast. And not only do they start wiping us out and terrorizing our coast, they burn Washington to the ground. America could cease to exist. But they stood up, we came together, Battle of Baltimore standoff, but we still don't have the right generals. We don't have the right financing. We got this other guy, and his name is Andrew Jackson. Who's Andrew Jackson? This guy is an orphan, wiped out by 13 years old. His dad died before he was born. His older brother dies fighting the British. Him and his other brother, who was 14 years old at the time, decide to be couriers for our cause. The British catch him. They chase him back into his house. And they said, wipe my shoes. I had to go up to the mud to find him. And he says, no, that's Andrew Jackson. Then 13 years old says, no, that's not the code of war. That's not how you treat a prisoner. Up comes the sword. Him and his brother. He puts his hand up, his brother doesn't, he gets hit on the head. His brother gets knocked unconscious, never fully recovers. Andrew Jackson had a scar the rest of his life and is taken to prison. His mom sits there outside the prison, finally works it out where he gets him out. His brother's barely conscious, they finally get him home, he dies. The mom says, it's just me and you, I need a job. She goes to get a job. Turns out a case turns up on her porch. It's his mom's clothes. She died, he never finds out. Andrew Jackson's alone in America right after the Revolutionary War. He should have become a vagrant, a criminal. But instead, the county and the country rallied around him. He became a lawyer, a judge, a senator, a congressman, a military hero, and a two-time president of the United States. That only happens in America. An orphan leads us at our most vital time. Flashback. We're losing the War of 1812, but this guy named Andrew Jackson's got a militia in Tennessee of 50,000 men. And he says, I'm ready to fight. They go, listen, Jackson, you're raw. We're Virginians. We know how to fight. We won the last war. We didn't need you. We got it. Well, when we're losing, they go 1-800-ANDREW JACKSON. They get rid of the Secretary of War, Armstrong, and they bring in this guy named James Monroe. He goes, I always liked Jackson. A little crazy, but I liked him. What do you want to do? He goes, well, the Creeks Indians have allied with the British. Let me fight them, and then I'm going to go to New Orleans because that's where they're going to be. Sounds good. Well, when the Battle of Baltimore was a standoff, the flag was still there. We opened up with the national anthem. That's what that's about. We stood them off, and we did something else. We took out their officers. The British had this great idea, dress in red and put the most important people up front. By the way, even on board games, that's not a good idea. What do? We sit there and we shoot the most important people dead. That guy was supposed to lead the British in New Orleans. They were supposed to be partying, literally, on Bourbon Street, because it was a party town even then, on Christmas. But Andrew Jackson wipes out the Creeks, meets you in New Orleans, and he knows he's going to be outnumbered. And he knows this is the crew that beat Wellington. These were Wellington's Invincibles who just defeated Napoleon. Now they defeat Napoleon, they're going to finish us off. This brand new country, 26 states, colonies, who just got Louisiana, they're going to finish us off. They're going to prove that the Louisiana Purchase was illegally done, and they're going to flip it. They're going to stop America from growing past the Mississippi River. But Andrew Jackson stands up, lines up, and said the British will not have one restful night on our shores. And the minute they land, as night falls, they attack with bayonets and machetes. And they said, uh-oh, this is going to be different. When they decide to come forward to get to New Orleans, Jackson dug wells, built a wall, filled it with water, and waited. And the one thing about Americans, they could shoot. Why? Because they like to eat. The supermarkets were all closed back then, and they would shoot for their dinner. We had better guns and better sharpshooters. And every time they moved forward, we killed another one of their officers. Wiped him out in 13 days, wiped him out one day in a matter of hours. They set up a convent to be a hospital for Americans. We had 13 dead. They had hundreds. We wiped out the best army in one day. We did what Napoleon couldn't. Wellington said, when they said, hey, why don't you go finish off the Americans? He goes, I don't promise myself much success there, but you could take my army and my brother-in-law. His brother-in-law came back in a barrel, Pakenham. Andrew Jackson was the right man at the right time in the right country. We would never be invaded again. The world would know America's for real, and gave hope to elections and democracy around the world. These guys matter, and we continue to grow. Along the way, there was this thing called Islamic extremism, and we had to do this thing called trade right after the Revolutionary War. We have to fight our way out of, and grow our way, and trade our way, and work our way out of debt. We need the Mediterranean. But these 5 Islamic nations decide that everybody who comes through must pay a tribute, a ransom, extortion. In Atlantic City, we know a few things about that. Used to, anymore. So they come through, start taking our crew, taking our ships. So Jefferson and Adams go over and say, hey guys, I don't know if you know this or not, we're a brand new country. We don't have a problem with you. You have a problem with the British. You have a problem with the Spanish. You have a problem with the French. Not us. We're brand new. They go, yeah, we know about you guys. You're paying triple. If you want your guys out, they're being tortured. They're hostages. So Adams comes out of the meeting and he says, man, we got to find a way to pay them. And Jefferson comes out of the meeting and goes, guys, if we don't punish the first insult, more will follow. So little by little, we decide we're going to take on, which is now Libya, then Tripoli. And we block their ports. We're not able to stop them. Our ships are too big. And we build smaller ships. And we get coordination. And little by little, we seal their ports. But we can't, without a ground war, stop them. Because those leaders don't care about their people. We're great people, horrible leaders.
So this guy named William Eaton puts together a militia, gets the deposed leader that was hanging out in Egypt, and they go 500 miles through the desert without a map, looking at the stars, and take the second biggest city, which we now know is Libya, but then it was Tripoli, Derna, in about 6 hours. America, in our short time, did more than all the Western powers did in all their time. They wrote checks, they provide gifts, we took them on. And the guy that took them on was probably the only one to do it, Thomas Jefferson. Why? He was an intellect. He understood the region. He understood the challenges. He understood how the rest of the world looked at us. A upstart nation that had to be stopped because they wanted colonization and they wanted domination. They don't want their colonies to get their independence like, I don't know, us. And Jefferson, who wouldn't get through a militia for the Revolutionary War guy, was the perfect guy to be president then. Adams says, thanks for the Navy, don't want to use it. Jefferson says, we're not paying any more extortion, we're going to fight. We now have a Navy led by Edward Preble. The codes from Edward Preble, he is the father in the Navy, is still used today. Stephen Decatur. You know about Jefferson, I got it. You don't know about William Eaton, you don't know about Stephen Decatur, and you don't know about Edward Preble. They were famous in their day, but not in our day. That's why I hoped you picked up Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates. And over 1 million people bought the book. And the main reason is, I'm really cute. And the main reason is, America fundamentally does love the American story. Does know we're not perfect. But does understand that we're exceptional, not because we like the home team, because we knew when we were born here we hit the lotto, and every day we get a chance to compete for the Super Bowl. And there are most countries in this world can't. You want to look at our southern border? A lot of people just come in here because their countries suck. And ours on our worst day is better than theirs on their best day. Our country has the right people at the right time. Unsung heroes who never get the credit they deserve. But America, not without problems. As we move forward, we continue to grow. And believe it or not, people say, you know, the tax is a little high, it's a little crowded, a little political. I think we need this other place called Texas. Now, Jackson thought that John Quincy Adams should have taken Texas when we won the war of 1812. He says, we really deserve it. And Quincy Adams goes, Texas is a mess, we don't want it, we're just going to take Florida. And Jackson's like, are you crazy? We should have taken it. So in the back of his mind, he wants it. Now, the guy fighting with Jackson is a guy named Sam Houston. Harry was kind enough to say my books connect, and they do, because Rocky movies connected, and those are the best movies ever. And when one ends, the other one starts. And in case you forget, they start at the last scene and they can't go forward. 22-year-old Sam Houston is fighting like a kamikaze for Andrew Jackson against the Creeks. And he goes up there and he gets shot in the leg. He looks like he's going to die, and all of a sudden he said, just pull out and gets shot in the leg, gets an arrow in the leg. He looks at his guy, he's in so much pain, he said, pull the arrow out. I can't, it's stuck. He goes, pull it out, puts his gun to the American's head, and the guy pulls it out. Well, the bleeding wouldn't stop. They put him in sickbay. They think he's going to die. Then all of a sudden Jackson goes, listen, we got to finish him off tonight before the sun goes down. I need some people to volunteer. Up goes Sam Houston's hand. Sam Houston goes in there again, gets shot in the shoulder, goes straight ahead. He thinks he's going to die. They don't even want to operate. They go, this guy's been through enough. They don't touch him. He wakes up in the morning in a lot of pain. They realize they can get this bullet out. They try. And then they send him to Washington, D.C. He looks around and sees everything blown up. And he said, man, democracy is fragile. But that kamikaze would be the perfect guy to know when to retreat against Santa Anna when it came to the Battle of Texas. When Texas decides they want their freedom, because Santa Anna comes in as a brutal autocrat and says, I want all of Mexico, we say, excuse me, we had a deal. Texas is going to be part of Mexico, but we're going to do our own thing. Stephen F. Austin worked at the deal, and Santa Anna goes, no, there's a new sheriff in town. We want our cannons back. We no longer will protect you. If you don't turn the keys over and start paying us more money, we're going to take it. So Stephen F. Austin goes, listen, I can talk our way out of this. He goes in there, we throw him in jail. He comes back and goes, we're going to have to fight. We have a few skirmishes, the Texans being Texans win them. And they're real pumped up. And they decide we're going to make this church, this monastery, at the Alamo, we're going to fortify it. And we're going to get our best guys. And when they come, we're going to wipe them out. So they get guys like Jim Bowie, William Barrett Travis, and this guy named Davy Crockett. And Davy Crockett is a celebrity of the day. He had to fight with Jackson, ironically. He says, I got to start anew. I'm going to Texas. He goes there, he shows up, and they think they're going to be great. They think they're going to win this. So when Santa Anna decides they're going to finish him off, they start welling up. The word goes to Sam Houston, then in charge of the army, get out of the Alamo, Santa Anna's coming. So he sends in Jim Bowie at the time. He said, Jim, go in there, get these guys out. We can't fight them here. We got to go back. We don't need San Antonio. We'll just back up and we got to train, we got to get ready. Jim Bowie goes in there and sees the great spirit amongst the guys and says, I'm staying. So he stays. Sam Houston thinks he pulled him out. Communication isn't great back then. There was no AT&T. So he thinks they're out. Santa Ana comes in, and over the course of 13 days, he loses close to 3,000 people. We get our guys wiped out, and they fought to the death. Remember the Alamo. William Barrett Travis's letters, knowing he knows he was not going to live again to take care of my kids, but I'm going to fight to the death. They go, that's the valor we need. That's an American attitude. But Sam Houston, the kamikaze at 20, was much more deliberative at 40. And he said, we got to pull back. Scorched earth. Bless you, sir. We got to pull back. We got to keep going back. We got to wait for one fight. We're going to have one fight in us. We're going to suck them into Texas. They're going to feel the heat. The uniforms are too thick. They'll be distant from their supply lines, and we're going to fight them. Are you kidding me? They wiped us out at Goliad. They wiped us out in the Alamo. We're Texans. We're going to fight. But Sam Houston learned from Andrew Jackson. You got to pick your battles. You got to shape the battlefield. You have to fight. Right person at the right time. He shaped it, pinned him into San Jacinto. When Santa Ana arrived, his guys were so exhausted, they took a rest. Back then, the night vision glasses were stuck at FedEx, and they knew if they did not fight by 5 o'clock, they're not going to fight. So if you don't start at 9, you can't go. So Jackson gets up in the morning and says, Houston gets up in the morning and says, you know what, let's meet at 12. He meets at 12 and he goes, guys, I know you've been wanting to fight for 2 weeks, right? Today's the day. He goes, General, what do you mean today's the day? It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He goes, exactly. They're not ready. Sam Houston forges ahead, gets shot again, because he continues to lead, but they win the Battle of San Jacinto and take Texas in 17 minutes. They actually capture Santa Ana, but instead of killing them, they do the right thing. They said, we need you to do a few things. Call off your reinforcements, give us Texas, and promise not to invade again. And he does. Eventually, they send Santa Ana back. He becomes a nemesis for us. We finish him off in 1845. Right people at the right time, that's your history. Willing to wait it out until Mexico got too aggressive, that's the story. Texas eventually would come into the Union. And then we had this thing called the Civil War. America was coming apart. We need the right person at the right time. There's no way it could be this guy named Abraham Lincoln. He's got 1 year of formal education. He loses almost every race he goes into. Nobody knows him. He's not really that good looking, but man, can he speak? He was self-taught. He knows just about everything. He understands American history. When he was in Congress, he was actually against the Spanish War. But he was this guy that was waiting for the right time. He ran for Senate, but he spoke so eloquently about getting rid of slavery and the need to live up to our Constitution. People kept him in mind. But there's no way he's going to win the presidency after he lost the Senate race. The problem is, the great thing for us is 3 people get in the race. They cancel each other out, including Stephen Douglas. And this guy without the majority becomes President of the United States. The right guy at the right time, you never know it. Because by the time he gets to the White House, half the country is left. Right guy at the right time? Doesn't look like it. But he stays the path. He understands we got to be one. It's got to be about the union. But if he's going to do this, he's going to need a partner. There's no way a slave could be a partner. There's no way a guy who knows if he was caught learning to read, he'd be killed on sight. There's no way a man born a slave who never knew his mom or never knew his dad would emerge and lead America at the exact right time. Not leave America, but lead America. His name was Frederick Douglass. He escapes to freedom as a fugitive. He learned to read and write on his own. He would do chores for the kids his age, and in turn they'd give him his homework so he'd work on it. And he became an eloquent speaker by reading the same thing that Abraham Lincoln read. This is called the Kilmeade Orator. And they read great men at great times. And he started imagining himself great leaders. Ironically, Lincoln never knew anything about Douglas. We're working in the same path. He gets to the North as an abolitionist. He begins to rally and let people know there's no difference between blacks and whites that we all know, but they didn't know that. They were brought up in a different culture. The North ahead of the South, obviously. This is going to be a fight, and it is about slavery. But Frederick Douglass is now known worldwide as a great orator, speaker, thinker who owns his own newspaper. It's not going to run from the country. He didn't say this is a horrible country. I was born a slave with no future. I never knew my birthday. You know what he said? We have to live up to our Constitution. America's got to have freedom and liberty for all. And I'm going to fight this out and make sure we can fight for our freedom. You know what they say? Fight's on. Thank goodness. Union's going to fight for our freedom. But we don't want blacks fighting. Are you kidding me? I got myself an army. I'll put my kids in. No. If you put African Americans in this fight, too many in the North would leave. America was not ready. Guess who knew it? A man that knew that blacks and whites were equal, Abraham Lincoln. But he knew he had to have patience because Americans weren't ready. But as this fight took off, and it got so bloody, where we'd eventually lose almost 600,000 people, we would have to get African Americans into the fight, and man, did they ever. Without them, the North doesn't win. They fight with valor and trustworthy. We have white men leading black men and realizing how great they are as war fighters. Years of prejudice just falls by the wayside. And this guy named Frederick Douglass, born a slave, not only because influential, he realizes for blacks to fight in this war, he's going to have to get to Lincoln. So for that to happen, he's got to wait on line like everybody else. Believe it or not, in the Civil War, with his enemy just miles away, he still had the door open every day when meet with people. As soon as Frederick Douglass got on the line, word got to Lincoln. Lincoln goes, send him in. He sends him in, and they talk. And he was so mad at Lincoln for not issuing the Emancipation Proclamation right away. He was so mad at Lincoln for not letting blacks fight right away until he saw him. And he said, the minute I looked at him, I saw a man of goodness and greatness. And he explained to me his thought. And he opened up the drawer, and there was Emancipation. And he goes, I think we're ready to issue it. And he finally knew the patience wasn't ignorance, that he was an activist. And he wanted one thing, but the guy with the game plan was Lincoln. Only in one country could you have two men at the right place at the right time to come together from the most outer reaches of this nation. Right people at the right time. And together, with his sons in the battle, and him running around to newly freed African Americans saying, fight in the war, even though the country has not treated you well, they will. And they did. And they won. Sadly, they knew what they had to do in the South. They had to flood the area with security and teachers. Everyone had to learn to read, to write, and they'd have to have some type of economic plan, just like today, to get them into the economy and let them know that they could be part of this great American story. Lincoln's assassinated, and to this day, I believe that John Wilkes Booth did more damage to this country than any other single human being, including Bin Laden and all our enemies combined. Because if you put Lincoln with Douglas for another term and another term, they would have had we would not in the 1860s, we would not have needed civil rights reform in the 1960s. We are not a perfect country, but what makes us great is we try to be. So Douglas did have a partner, and it wasn't Andrew Johnson. He's a vicious racist that had no business on that ticket. He put him there because he was in the South. They thought it could be a unity ticket once they won the war. But up come Ulysses S. Grant, and he did have a partner. So they worked together, and Grant and Douglas did some great work. But then comes 1876. Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. They're in this thing called a controversial election. I know it's so new to us. The popular vote went to Tilden, but Rutherford B. Hayes looked as though he had more electoral votes. We're coming up with the Civil War, still trying to sew this country back together. And he goes into the House of Representatives, and they say, hey, listen, we'll let Rutherford B. Hayes, the Ohio guy, be president. Get the Union troops out of the South and let us make our own rules. You're suffocating us. They go, yeah, we'll do it. In 1877, that compromise was detrimental to the future of America. Little by little, income separate but equal. In comes the Jim Crow laws. And all of a sudden, we see all the progress in front of our eyes that Douglas saw and that Lincoln hoped just dissipate. With Ulysses S. Grant leaving the scene, Rutherford B. Hayes wasn't up for it. People just allowed this stuff to take root. We needed two great men to step up and take over for Grant, for Lincoln, and for Frederick Douglass. Which brings me to Teddy and Booker T. I don't relish talking about race in America, but I relish learning about race in America. Yeah, it was brutal. You got lynched because you were black. People had 200 years of hearing that blacks were inferior to whites. That's what they learned. And it was terrible. In retrospect, how could you say that? But that was America at the time. Not everybody in the South, not everyone in the North was perfect, not everyone in the South was racist. But Booker T. Washington was born a slave. There is no way a guy born a slave, who never knew his dad, who had a great mom, who basically never had shoes and pants. There's no way that Booker T. Washington would be one of the finest educators, the greatest Americans ever. There's no way that Teddy Roosevelt, with asthma so bad there was certain he was going to die, he weighed 80 pounds up until what would have been for us the 11th grade, never could go to formal school. They thought he was too sick to do it. His first school was actually Harvard. His dad said, you got to read, you got to build up your mind because your body is weak. That stuck in him. And when he was finally able to overcome Teddy Roosevelt, the asthma, he lifted weights like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He did everything he can to be the opposite of what his dad, who he loved to death, who was this unbelievable man who he idolized. He said, I'm going to prove I'm not going to be a ward of the state. I'm going to be vigorous. Man, was he ever. We know the Teddy Roosevelt story, but you probably don't know how he teamed with Booker T. Washington. So Booker T. Washington, born a slave, just for some reason grew up wanting to learn. See, you can't learn. Until one day at 9 years old, he remembers being called to the big house, even though he never knew his birthday. And in the big house, he sees a Union soldier read something. And he says, in retrospect, in his words, I think it was Emancipation Proclamation, you guys are free. The celebration started. Everyone crying. Then they went back to the house and said, we had nowhere to go. For the mom, they had I guess we'd call her boyfriend. They saddled up the carriage and they went to West Virginia, where at 11 years old, he remembers just working in salt mines. And by all accounts, he was claustrophobic. All he wanted to do was learn to read and write. And he said, can I please learn to do it? So they finally found a way to get him a dictionary. And he would just sit there learning letters. And then he would learn words and just read this dictionary. And then, again, a page out of Think and Grow Rich, a page out of Norman Vincent Peale of the Future. He's trying to make this happen. And he overhears two people older than him complain about this woman. This woman, Miss Ruffin. And he goes, she's so mean, I'm going back to the salt mines. So what are you talking about? He goes, oh, this woman is awful, she's brutal, she screams at me, we're terrorized. He goes, what do you mean? He goes, well, I get paid the same. He gets all his money to his family. But she makes you clean the house. Nothing you ever do is good enough. You might like the game, but you'll hate it. So Booker T. Washington shows up and goes, I like the job. We'll see how it works out. Everything he does with vigor, and conscientiousness, and a determination like she's never seen. Every job she gives him, he does great. He goes, well, what do you want? I want to read. She goes, I'm a teacher. Great. So he begins to read with her. She begins to mentor him. Everything he learns to clean in a way that he later becomes a janitor, becomes the best janitor ever. Lead a way, and he learned to dress. He learned to walk. He learned how to hold himself. He said, I learned how to lose my Virginia dialect. And I learned how much more I wanted to learn. And one day, as he's walking back, he overhears people. He wants to go to college. And he overhears these two guys talking. If you can get to this university, Hampton University, they will accept you. So he looks at his family. He's 18 years old. And he goes, I'm going that way. He goes, what do you mean? I'm going that way. There's a college that way. And he hops on, which we call hitchhiking today. He finds a way to get to Hampton, runs out of all the money he had. I think it was $15. And then he starts working in the day, starts loading up ships. He's so good at it, they actually want to hire him a job. He goes, no, I'm going to Hampton. By the time he shows up at Hampton College, a historically black college, he's a mess. And they go, yeah, we have people that are not vagrants. We have standards. We're not interested in you. So he goes out, sleeps in between the cracks on the sidewalk, comes back the next day. He goes, I told you, you're a mess. What's your story? Because they just want to learn. He goes, well, you have no history. Where are your grades? We don't know anything about you. Comes back again, but this time he found a way to clean himself up. He shows up, and he goes, I want to learn. They're seeing the gumption that he has. And they said, well, before you learn, why don't you help? Clean that classroom. Clean that classroom. Okay, just one? I said, yeah. Cleans it. She goes, who helped you? She goes, I want to watch you do the next one. She watched me do the next one. They cleaned the whole school together. She goes, you're my new janitor. You can go to school at night. He ends up being the best student. His mentor, General Armstrong, said that ever went to Hampton College. He sent for his brothers. He changed his world, and it would eventually change our world. This guy would then go back to his hometown, teach, and they get word that they need someone to run night school. So he goes back to Hampton. And then General Armstrong, his white mentor, who's a war hero, who loved him to death, and he loved him, said, hey, I just got a message from this place in Alabama, Tuskegee. They got $1,000 to start a school. They want one recommendation. They want a white guy. I told you, I got a black guy, and he's going to be perfect. They don't want to hire you, so you need to sell yourself. He writes him a letter. They come back and goes, send in Booker T. Washington. He shows up. It's a dilapidated shed next to a dilapidated church. They go, we got to get this thing going in 3 weeks. There are no students. There's no property. There's no shelter. They end up with kids. Most they got is 13, then they got up to 30. There's sketches of him teaching with students holding umbrellas over his head. Then he realizes he's got to get this going, so he starts selling the town on what he's doing. But not the black side of town, the white side of town. Listen, anyone who goes to Tuskegee, you're gonna learn to read and write, but you're gonna learn to trade. Because right now, white people aren't ready to hire us. We're gonna prove to them what we are capable of by our actions. We're gonna learn how to brush our teeth. We're gonna learn how to dress. We're gonna learn how to address people. You're gonna learn the books, but at night you're gonna build up this school. And after a while, the school starts getting built up and people realize what an asset they are in the community. They go, the white people in the area go, how can I help? So it would be money, it would be labor, and they just watch this school take off. And then he decides, you know what, I'm tired of paying for bricks. This town needs bricks. So he buys a kiln. And 3 kilns fail, the 4th kiln works, and he gets the best bricks around. You know what he starts doing? Donating them to the town of Tuskegee. Here, Kurt, on a wagon, keep the bricks. And then suddenly, years of prejudice. They don't know why they thought they were better than white people or better than black people, but they love these guys, and they love Booker T. Washington. Then Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, hear about this guy, Booker T. Washington. So he goes north, and he realizes, in the north, yeah, I can stay in a hotel room. In the north, there's really not the races, the attitudes, the embedded attitudes in there. And Andrew Carnegie goes, how can I help? J.P. Morgan says, how can I help? Huntington says, how can I help? And the money starts coming in. And they begin to grow, and they're a teacher's college. So they're sending out students who know a trade, who are very smart, who are courteous, and understand how to give to society. They didn't look around and say, America is unequal, I hate it. And it's true. They're going, I'm going to make America better and change things. That's what Booker T. Washington said. And one day he said, I wanted the president to speak at my inauguration, at my commencement address. McKinley got word, needed the black vote, came down and appeared. But it was the governor of New York that heard this, read about this book, Up From Slavery, written by Booker T. Washington. Said, I gotta meet you. This is the most unbelievable story I ever heard. And they talked. And they said, whatever happens to you, let's work together. Then he becomes vice president. He writes a letter to Booker T. Washington. He goes, I'm vice president, there's nothing to do. So, you want to meet? He goes, why don't you come down and see Tuskegee? He goes, sounds great. McKinley gets shot. Teddy Roosevelt becomes president. One of the first things Teddy Roosevelt does, writes him, goes, I'm really sorry. I'm president now. I'm not going to have time to go see you. But would you come see me? So he becomes an advisor to the president. Wait a second. What kind of country is this? A 9-year-old slave who doesn't have pants or shoes, who slept in the mud and had the same thing every day of his life during his youth, he never remembers playing a game or having fun, is suddenly an advisor to the president? And yet, Teddy Roosevelt's mom was from the South. Her brothers fought in the Confederacy. America was changing, America was growing, and the same thing was happening around the world, but not at our pace. So we worked together, and one time, Teddy Roosevelt did this crazy thing. He said, me and my family are having dinner. We gotta meet later. Why don't you come over? Booker T. Washington goes, let me see. A black man having dinner with the President of the United States and his family. How do I say no? This could be a problem. They have the dinner. It becomes a national scandal to the point where they had to stay away from each other and almost go underground as advisors. Later on, it was referred to when John McCain lost graciously. He said to Barack Obama, there was one time which a black man wasn't allowed to eat in the White House, and now you're going to be hosting. That's your country. Not perfect, but trying to be. Great men emerging at the right time to show us there. For the most obscure places possible. These aren't the most famous men in America with the best education like our founding fathers were. These are people that emerge at the right time. And you can't say that's just natural or luck. Not after 245 years. So together, they showed the country there's no difference. And I wrote down a few quotes. And this is the book that comes out in a month that I've been working on really before the other one. So if you want to know Booker T. Washington, he says this: the Negro youth must work harder and perform his tasks even better than a white youth in order to secure recognition. Out of the hard work and unusual struggle, though, which he is compelled to pass, he gets a strength and a confidence that one misses, whose pathway is comparatively smooth by reason of birth and race. Yeah, it's harder for me, so what, is what he's saying. I have learned that success is to be measured not so much by the position that one reaches in life, as by the obstacles in which he has to overcome while trying to succeed. Isn't that what we try to tell all our kids? And sometimes we panic because we made our lives too easy. He's saying our lives too hard, and you're lucky. Do you think he got that out of a textbook? He got that out of what he saw. It would be so easy to be angry in their word, and I can't really hate people for being angry. But he also said this: I will never give another man the privilege of my anger, because that is giving them too much respect. He would not let that penetrate. And who was Teddy Roosevelt? A man of his times. He had some cringeworthy quotes, but his actions told everything. When you are going to a black man who's running a historically black college and asking for advice on judges and postmasters and generals, I'm pretty sure it's hard to make you a racist claim, but he says this: the only wise and honorable Christian thing to do is to treat each black man and each white man strictly on his merits, as a man giving him no more and no less than he shows himself worthy to have. That's a man ahead of his times. The right man at the right time. And get this, both dead by 60. The impact they made, the details, how their lives converged is what I put in Teddy and Booker T. What my hope is, that people don't overreact to the next George Floyd incident and say America is systemically racist. America works hard to have the most equal playing field possible, but that is impossible. What you do in life is overcome whatever in your way. You lose a parent at a young age, you lose a brother or a spouse at a young age, you're born into poverty, a divorce, whatever it is, abusive situations. I don't relish any of them, but I have news for you. It happens to all of us. All of us have our own story. These are the most famous, and I believe that we can learn from it. But fundamentally, the thing that keeps us together is this is our story. Sam Houston is our story, Andrew Jackson is our story, Booker T. Washington is our story, and the people you don't know that I hope you discover in these books, the Edward Prebbles, the William Eatons, that is our story too. It's not about fame or acclaim. When we got into this country, we hit the lotto, and every day we get to compete for the Super Bowl. And that's what we have to do is tell people, don't get angry, get them educated. The next tailgate party, hit them with facts, stories, and bios. Don't hit them with anger, and don't sit there and let your face turn red. Listen, and then educate. We're not perfect, but we try to be. So that's why anytime I have a chance to speak about our country, I love it. Harry, it's not your fault about the weather, but this is truly an honest, one of the best events you could possibly be at. The picture was totally unnecessary, but it's totally appreciated. And this is the first time I had a chance to talk publicly about a book I've been working on for 4.5 years. So it was very therapeutic and great for me to be able to say this story out loud, outside the book on tape, which I just finished. So that's why I'm going to finish off this side of the room and give you the plates to put in. And if you want me to sign for somebody else, I'll do that too, because we have some extra book plates. Thanks so much for listening. I'll take some of your questions if Harry comes back up, but that's all it's there.
Brian Kilmeade, Jason. No one in America, no A-list media person in the country can do what Brian Kilmeade just did. Completely extemporaneous, a man of history. How many people learned something in this presentation that you never heard before? I mean, amazing. All right, let's, anyone have